Hello again. Um, so I will start by saying certain announcements that I just learned today. Apparently, CUNY is going to another recess from tomorrow till Wednesday, I think. That means you won't have a class on Monday, but we will have a class on Thursday. And I don't know what we will read for Thursday, but I will figure out tomorrow and send you guys an information about that. Yeah, I wasn't a big fan of this recess, but I think the main idea is that some students they need computers and they need more time to get used to this kind of way of doing the classes. And I mean, if that's the case, obviously I'm not gonna do the class on Monday. And if you need assistance, help with computers, or you have internet problems, just let me know. And I think they have sent us information about where to go and seek computers. For instance, I think CUNY will be giving 1,500 computers. I'm not sure about the numbers, but if you need some technological assistance or computer, I think you can go and get that. Um, before continuing with divination, fortune telling through cups in Turkey, I'm really glad that you liked the article. And I think, as Anna says in her reflection paper, this is like a nice fresh air to the articles that were kind of dominated from the male perspective. So we see how gender plays out in this case in divination. Before jumping into that, I want to just say that I really like your comments for the cryonics reading, for Farmon's reading. And I especially like the link that Stephanie makes in the comment. She says that actually the way that cryonics treat the bodies as patients can be thought as a liminal space, liminality, which was a term that Victor Turner used, if you remember from previous classes. And yes, we can say that the way that chronics people are thinking about the patients, as they say it, they are in this liminal place between the life that they have lived and between the life that they will live once the science develops or once the science improves enough to bring those people back to life, also cure their diseases. Yes, so let's begin with our topic today. I wanted to send you a video about fortune telling or divination in Turkey through coffee cups, but I couldn't find a good one, and the one that I was thinking of, it was impossible to stream it. We needed to pay, so I'm gonna do something today. So this is the coffee cup that actually I had the coffee today, and I sent the photos to a friend. So the way you do the divination, I'm gonna just show you. So you drink it, and after you drink it, the grounds remain on the bottom of the cup, and then you put the plate on it, and then you give it a stir, and you do this, and you wait until the cup gets cold because it's hot, and then you open it, and then you see some images once the grounds are dry, and then you interpret the images. And the language of divination is usually vague. So they tell you, for example, in 2 times. That means in 2 days, or in 2 weeks, or in 2 months, or in 2 years, this will happen. Or a tall man will help you about something related to work. So the overall language is a bit vague, and Korkman actually ties this vague language to the way that the fortune tellers kind of recalibrate the reading and the emotions of the person whose cup is red. Yeah. So let's start with Korkman's article, and I want to add my perspective at the end. So she's saying that fortune telling through a coffee cup is a very popular practice, and it's not a new practice. It's been, I actually, one of the things that I wanna figure out is the history of it, which I haven't researched very well yet, but it's been a practice for a very long time, and it's predominantly gendered. So obviously there are men who who want their cups to read, who want their readings done. Also men who does the reading, but usually it's a form of activity that women practice. And Korkman is saying it's a pastime activity. For example, it can be among friends, or it can be among relatives, and it's like something that lifts your spirit, Korkman says, right? It's just you, it's kind of an excuse to talk about your, I don't know, problems, your hopes, your dreams, your plans with the other person, and it creates an intimacy, builds an intimacy between the reader and the person whose cup is read. Also, it's an exchange. Usually you read a person's cup, and then the other person reads the cup. Also, it's like, as Amanda was saying in her reflection paper, it's not just typical to Turkey. It's practiced in different places, and actually, the like Turkish coffee is called Greek coffee in Greece. So every nation is claiming the coffee and maybe the practice, but it's widely done across the world in different places, and yeah, it's building a form of intimacy among friends, relatives, among women predominantly. But Korkman is talking about a break. This turn happens in the 2000s, and there are coffee shops opening or already open, who they hire the fortune tellers as um, reading reading the coffee cups for the clients. So the fortune tellers are paid, and the clients pay money for their fortunes get read. And this, she calls, this is a form of commodification of labor. So something that wasn't a commodity, something that wasn't in the circle of exchange through money, becomes a commodity, something that you can buy actually. But it's interesting because she says that this is commodification of intimacy, because you're not buying a product actually, but you are just buying a form of intimacy. And this form of intimacy, I think Alexandria was relating this in a very good way to mouse, Because if you remember what Miles was saying that if the exchange happens outside of the relations of money, outside of market economy, then that exchange has a potential to build intimacy, to um, to further the relationship, to make it in a deeper relationship that it was. But once the money is involved, then there is actually no form of solidarity, no form of potential relationship that can be built among people. So in this case, this is the case, as Korkman is also saying. Like, in this form of intimacy, in this form of commodified intimacy, there is no, even if it's like an instant intimacy built between the between the people, the fortune teller and the person who gets her coffee cup reading, but there is no continuance to that relationship. And people, and this is a devalued, gendered form of labor. Yeah, this is what Korkman is arguing, because people who work in these coffee shops, they are usually people who are marginalized. They are LGBTQ people, transsexuals, transgenders, and the labor that is put into coffee readings is already marginalized, Korkman is saying. So there is a tendency even in people who go and have their fortunes read, there is a tendency to look at this form of labor, what fortune tellers are performing, as a form of being charlatans or kind of fooling people, playing with the hopes of the people. So it's a devalued form of labor. Also, it's a very precarious labor for the people who work, because as Korkman was mentioning, the labor is not their work conditions are not great, and there is no formal contract, and um, it's a precarious form of labor. So Stephanie, in her reflection paper, she was saying, oh, this is like a market for marginalized people, yeah, to work. Yes, but also we have to bear in mind that this market is kind of marginalizing these people by offering them only precarious jobs, but not secure jobs with health insurance, for example, or contracts. Yeah. Um, and Korkman is, as many of you were mentioning in your reflection papers, coining a term, feeling labor. So she's talking about emotional labor or affective labor, and why she's not calling this form of labor as emotional labor. She's saying that there has been a literature on thinking about the kind of labor that women producers create through engaging emotionally, right? Nurses or flight attendants. And this kind of labor includes kind of emotional labor in the sense that women perform an emotion to activate or to make the other person feel something, or make them have a certain kind of mindset. Yeah, that That is the argument about emotional labor. But feeling labor is different, she says, because this is not about one person performing a certain emotion and then making an impact on the other. This says the reading makes two people come together in a kind of, they share an emotional or an affective space for the duration of the reading. Yeah, so she's saying that the fortune teller needs or expected to gauge the person's feelings and then make the make the person go through a scale of emotions. Yeah, at first she's intrigued and she's like a bit stressed and she's waiting for answers about her personal life, and then the fortune teller gives her kind of a despair or talks about the actual problems of her life and then says that everything will be fine, not in maybe in 1 month but in 2 months and in a year she will have a good situation, overall good situation. So there is this range of emotions that the fortune teller takes her. But to take the person through this range of emotions, she's also performing a very effective task. So, a couple of words about affect theory, maybe. So people who were thinking about emotions and maybe emotional labor or emotions in the other settings, they were saying, okay, emotions are part of our lives, but also affects play an important role. Affects, they say, is the pre-emotional state. Yeah, it's the because when we feel an emotion, we are aware of that emotion. But affect is the state of being that we are inside, but we are not very conscious of. So, usually they give this example. This is not related to the article, like this example is not related to the article, but to understand affect, they give this. They give the example of you enter a room, you don't see, for instance, say that there's a gun in the room and you don't see the gun in that room, but you kind of sense that there is something off in the room. So that domain, that pre-emotional domain, is affect. So she's saying that this is kind of an affective labor, actually, that the fortune teller is expected to engage in, because she's gauging different affects that the reader is getting in. But the reason why she's saying this is feeling labor instead of affective labor, because this is a gendered form of labor. So she wants to specify that. So women are usually engaging with the kind of labor that involves feelings. So, in order to stress that, she calls this kind of labor feeling labor. So, if you go to page 199, yeah, she says divination labors include but are neither limited to nor centered on the worker's management of emotional displays in order to create particular emotional states in customers. They rather depend on interpersonal processes of affective attunement that foster emotional incitement and identification and blur the very boundaries between self and other and managed and spontaneous feelings. So she says that like the reader and the person whose copy is read, they enter in a place where the boundaries of self and other kind of blurs and they share this affective place. That's why it's affective. And this affective place is to foster certain range of emotions for the person whose cup is red. And then in the later on of the paragraph, she says, I choose the term feeling labor over affective labor in order to preserve my attention to the culturally meaningful processes of social construction of emotions attended to by the emotional labor literature, alongside non-representational affect processes addressed by the affective labor literature. Yeah. And there was another quote on page 205. The first paragraph on the page. The feeling labor of divination facilitates the production, experience, and expression of emotions through an effectively intense ritualized interaction. Feeling labor includes, but is qualitatively different from, emotional labor that requires one to induce or suppress feeling in order to sustain the outward continence that produces the proper state of mind in others. Feeling labor affects the mood of others through the creation of an enchanted intersubjective space in which the client can explore, experience, and engage with various emotions with the guidance of the worker. Yeah. So actually, the worker is not putting the person in certain states of emotion, but kind of creating a space or creating the background for the person to engage with this various kind of emotions. So that's why it's affective labor. Feeling labor certainly depends on, but it is not reducible to, affective labor that is characterized by the creation and manipulation of affects. The feeling labor of divination is based on the mobilization of affective capacities and flows in order to animate an occult language of emotions that fosters the articulation of desires, aversions, longings, and apprehensions. Yeah, I think this is a very good paragraph that where she explains why she's using to call it feeling labor instead of emotional labor, and why she's kind of situating her study through the lens of affect theory and affect literature. And yeah, I think this is all what I want to say about Korkman. Oh, I think one of you was talking about how this emotional labor topic is also related to the woman's labor in house, for example, like motherhood. And if you think, for example, the way that people have been theorized or have not been theorized the woman's work in house, we can see how Korkman's understanding is shaped through um, through how people were thinking of emotional labor in domestic places. So, for example, when we were talking about labor first time in this class, it was through Marx, yeah? So Marx is talking about alienated form of labor, but he's not talking about women's labor because it is what reproduces men's labor in factories were women's labor in houses. Yeah, so those kind of labor, for example, taking care of children or housework, were called after Marx invisible labor. Yeah, because that was the labor which didn't have any value in the public sphere or any value in terms of money. Yeah, so it was invisible labor. But through the rise of women having more jobs, we see a rise in the form of emotional labor. Yeah, emotional or devalued labor, as you were saying. Some like people tend to think that women are better fits for being nurses because they're more like caregivers. So there was a gendered division of labor, and certain jobs were thought to be more fitting to men, and certain jobs which were related to emotions or taking care of people were thought to be fitting to women. I mean, this is pure ideology. This is not a fact. Um, we see that how this form of emotional labor changes towards feeling labor, and also towards how it further marginalizes in neoliberalism. Yeah, and we see that not only the form of labor changes, but certain things who were not that were not part of market economy, such as coffee reading, becomes a commodity. And that's why she's telling that it's commodification of intimacy. Yeah, I think this is all about Korkman I wanted to say. And my take is a bit different on fortune telling, because I'm more interested in the lens of religion and secularism. I think that was my take, because it has, in my point of view, fortune telling has characteristics of religion and characteristics of a secular space, for example, a therapy. So it's very kind of, and I think Amanda was saying this in her reflection paper, it's kind of reminiscent to a therapy, yeah, where we talk about someone's problems and further solutions, but it's also a marginalized space. So it's marginalized because the secular law, so after the Ottoman Empire came to an end and there was the Turkish Republic was founded, there was a very radical secular turn that Turkey took. So in this secularization processes, religious schools were banned and religious symbols were banned. Also, some practices were labeled as superstitious. Yeah, and for example, fortune telling. So in a, in legal domain, in legal law, it's forbidden to to perform divination in exchange of money. So you cannot, for example, what the people in these coffee shops are doing is illegal. And fortune telling is strictly banned in Quran as well. So if you claim to know the future of a person, then you are kind of claiming to be God, and that's a very sinful act. So when you look at it, both the secular and the religious authorities, there is a ban on fortune telling, but it's super popular. So my initial question is, how can we make sense of this? Like, there is a paradox. Even if it's banned from both sides, it's still super popular. Also, I think what I want to include in my study is the practices that are called sorcery. I mean, people who practice sorcery, they do not call them sorcery, but people who kind of judge these practices as superstitious or backwards, they call these practices sorcery. So those can have very different forms, but especially the the women who read fortunes in their houses for in exchange of money, they also um, offer these practices. Like they say, oh, if you do not have good relation with your partner, I may tell this to Hoja and ask him to do some prayers and make your relationship better again. So I want to include those practices as well. And I also want to take this similarity to therapy seriously and try to see how people navigate different forms of healing or different forms of, like, what kind of intimacy is created during the fortune telling session and what kind of intimacy is created in therapy, and what are the reasons behind people preferring one over the other, or why and how a certain form of interacting with one person, such as therapy, is seen more authorized and with more scientific claims or objectivity, or more accepted in a way in terms of general society, and the other is marginalized but yet very popular. So those would be my questions. But I think, yeah, I agree that Korkman's piece is great, and she's doing a great job in relating coffee reading to capitalism, neoliberalism, and gendered labor and commodification of intimacy. Yeah, okay. Thank you very much. This is the end, and yeah, let me know any questions, comments, and I'm gonna send you the reading for next week, Thursday, for Thursday tomorrow.